Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Duke Football Coverage Podcast, brought to you as always by Bull City Coordinators. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts. Check us out at our website, bullcitycoordinators.com. Follow us on Twitter at Duke FB Coverage. That is Foxtrot Bravo Coverage. Our DMs are open. Send us an email, bullcitycoordinators at gmail.com. It has been a while since our last interview. We have been busy here on my end, a lot of work. We've had some COVID cancellations that we're going to maybe reschedule as a bonus episode later on once the season gets started, or perhaps what we'll do is slot those guests in for season 3. But we have a returning guest who is back for his third appearance on the podcast. He played offensive line at Duke from the 2016 to 2019. And his second interview is now the third most listened to in podcast history. He is trailing only John Latina and Coach Matt Sims, who is skyrocketing to the top with 69 total listens so far. I think everybody wants to get an idea of what to expect from ECU as they play North Carolina State early this season. But our guest, returning for his third appearance here on the podcast, is the one, the only, Lee Rodio. How are you, sir?
Ben, it's great to be back with you, man. I'm doing well, and I appreciate you having me back on. One correction, I don't want to take away any glory or respect from the offensive line room. I was a long snapper. I guess that technically is an offensive line position. We're all centers when it gets down to it. We all snap the ball, just varying distances, but did want to put that on the record.
I'll find a way to edit this at some point and dub in long snapper. But you did play offensive line in high school, though, right?
I did. I still consider myself part of the offensive line fraternity because it takes a special type of person to make a career out of blocking for other people. But so I was flattered when you said it. I just didn't want to take any undue respect, because that's a high bar to be a Duke offensive lineman.
Once an O lineman, always an O lineman, right?
Yes, sir.
Well, why don't, before we get into the Duke football season, why don't you tell us what you've been up to since you were last on the podcast? It's been about a year, I think, maybe a little bit more since you were last on. You've had a lot going on. You had a friend of yours need some help getting off of a jury panel for the Western District of Virginia here where I live. Would just bring us up to speed with what's going on.
Yes. I'm fixing to start my third year of law school, which is a sentence that I'm still not incredibly okay with saying. It's nice to have the end of law school in sight, but rearing its ugly head at the end of law school is that bar exam. So it's a double-edged sword. But I do say that all mostly in jest. I mean, it has been a wonderful experience. It's been challenging in all the right ways as a student at the law school of the school down the road, who shall remain nameless, but it wears that really not great shade of blue. But as I tell people, I'm doing my best to get the best of both blues, Duke and the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. But I've been completed an internship this year with an attorney in Durham, Daniel Meyer, phenomenal guy. I don't think, it would be hard to envision a better boss. Just a really, really great practitioner of the law who does things the right way. I've also been working as a remote intern and legal assistant with the New Hanover County Board of Elections, which is down in Wilmington, getting my feet wet in some election law. I don't really want to pursue election law from a career standpoint, but with my connection to politics and running campaigns, hopefully one day having a campaign of my own for one office or another, I thought it would be nice to sort of satiate that interest in have my two passions align, I guess, and see what the legal side of elections is like, and especially in the political climate that we have been immersed in recent months and years. It's been very enlightening, very informational, and definitely a good experience.
If this were a different theme podcast, we could talk about the independent state legislature theory, which we all may learn about next Supreme Court term, but we don't have enough time to go into that. I don't have enough alcohol in my house to try to process what that could mean for our republic, but moving past it, 3L year, I've said it to you before, I'll say it again, keep your foot on the gas.
Absolutely.
Don't let up. Other people will take advantage of their mistakes. All right.
Yes,
now, you mentioned getting ready for the bar exam. That is a miserable process, speaking from experience, but tell us, have you given any thought to where you may sit for the bar? What state?
North Carolina. My ideal plan is to practice in the state. I don't have an aversion to potentially going elsewhere, where if life or work takes me elsewhere. But and then, that with that comes with it the necessity of pursuing certification in different jurisdictions. But North Carolina is the plan, just keeping it straightforward, not trying to do too much. And at least for a little while, I do want to practice in the Raleigh-Durham legal community.
Well, good deal. We hope that works out well, and I hope you do not go into the dark pit of sadness and depression that I went into after taking the bar exam. I passed it, but I was, and I'll apologize again to my wife, I was in such a depressed, convinced I had failed state of mind that she actually called my parents and asked if I had ever acted like that before, which was very abnormal to me. I'll tell you that, and I probably have told this story before, but I rolled my ankle, something awful, playing basketball the Thursday before the bar exam. And in Virginia, you have to wear a suit, but to the bar exam. But fortunately, you have to wear soft-soled shoes. So you'd wear, sneakers, right? Tennis shoes. So that helped. 2-day bar exam. Then the next day, my wife, who was pregnant at the time, we went and sat through a closing on the home we were buying. So that was a pretty not great 3 days. All right. So I hope just, ride it out, do all the bar prep, and come out of it with a better mindset than I did.
I've always been the type of person that, some people have a lot of anxiety between the time you sit and the time you get your score. But I've always looked at it as, whether it was an exam in school, the LSAT, the SAT, whatever, that's the most blissful time, because no matter what you do, the die's already been cast. So between the time you take the exam and the time that you know how you did on it, you ain't got a care in the world.
Yeah, we moved down, I think maybe a week later, rolled my ankle again while we were moving it. That was fantastic. I just, but it was 2008. And so my wife was going up to Lexington for work. She'd drive up to work every day. I'd go walk my dog. And what was happening during August of 2008, the Olympics.
Yep.
And what basketball team was playing basketball? The Redeem team. So I watched a ton of the Redeem team, got my mind off it. By the time I rolled into work in September, totally forgot about it. Son was born 6 weeks early. And as he keeps staying in the hospital and we're waiting for the bar exam results, I started to say, I really better pass this test, because this hospital stay ain't cheap, man. So, but I got over it real quick and got back to normal. And USA, Dream Team, Redeem Team, 2008, Coach K. Thanks for pulling me through, guys. I appreciate it.
There you go.
Well, why don't we switch gears from the misery that is the bar exam and talk about what is hopefully going to be a good and an optimistic and a sign of things to come 2022 Duke football season. Why don't we begin with getting your thoughts on Coach Elko, the new staff, and the new direction of Duke football?
I think it was pretty readily apparent just based off of the introductory press conference, so much of being a Division I football coach these days is being an equally as effective politician, selling the program, getting people to come to the games, obviously recruiting that same spirit, but even more so in the era of NIL. I think he has done a phenomenal job so far. I think he has projected the kind of culture that is exactly what you want to project to entice young men to want to be a part of it. I think the excitement is just the right middle ground between lowballing the expectations and getting people way too excited, and setting the bar so high that you can't help but fall short of it. I think we are charting a very realistic, very promising course. And from the standpoint of the players, how I know I'm getting old is there's only one class left of guys that I played with, which is absolutely insane to think about. But you talk to them and, just their outlook on, life. Saying their outlook on life puts a little bit more emphasis on the importance of football than football deserves, but their outlook on life within the Duke football program has changed. There's a happiness, there's an energy, there's a desire to want to perform for this coaching staff, who I think the players really feel has their best interests at heart. And it's fun to watch. And it really is gratifying because this class has been through the absolute ringer. They went from a jump pass away from making a bowl game their freshman year to, two absolutely abysmal seasons. And I have to imagine 2020 would have been an abysmal season no matter what the record was. I can't imagine. I think, was it Alabama that won it that year, and down in Florida? I don't know that even they probably would have said they had a great time. Living in a hotel, your life existing between point A, point B, and point C, and that being about it. There's so many guys in that locker room who not only deserve this because of the work they put in, but deserve it because of the type of people they are. And the controlled chaos of a coaching change, I was fortunate enough not to have to endure it, but just witnessing it from a perspective of still knowing people that went through it and having friends in other teams throughout Division I football that have had to endure it. It's not fun, and it can be a very grueling and very hard, in some instances, heartbreaking, very not rewarding process. But this class has stuck through it. They have persevered. They've worked hard. Their presence in the weight room. You see these guys that you see a guy for the first time in 3 or 4 months, and he looks like a completely different person in terms of how the kind of shape that they're getting them in. Coach Feely's doing a phenomenal job in the weight room. So I think there's a lot of reason to be optimistic about the direction that Duke football is headed. I think we have to be realistic again. Rome wasn't built in a day, and I think we all have a pretty fair understanding of the realities of first-year coaching administrations in Power 5 football. But I think there's a lot of, objectively speaking, I think there's a lot of things to be excited about for Duke football fans.
Well, you were you mentioned this, how bad kind of maybe the second half of 2019 through 2021 was for all these guys. And you were on a team that had a losing season in 2016, in large part, almost exclusively due to injuries more than anything else. Then you were on 2 straight bowl teams and should have been a third in 2019, as you mentioned. Talk a little bit about what this team is going to need to do in order to turn things around. And when I say turn things around, we can talk about this in a little bit more detail later. I'm referring primarily from what I'm referring to is primarily getting back to where you're having a chance to win games.
Yeah, and that's another thing that comes back to the importance of guys who've done it before. And I think that's a really big cultural hurdle that this team is going to have to overcome because I first of all shout out to my guy Jackson Hubbard. He came the year after me, and he's still on the team 6 years later. Um, I think if I'm he is the only player left from the Quick Lane Bowl team, and I think there's maybe a handful of guys that played on the team that won the Independence Bowl against Temple, and there is the importance of not even necessarily their performance on the field, but their presence in the locker room and in the zeitgeist of the team, to use an insufferable word. The it means so much to any group of individuals and trying to accomplish a common goal in life, and specifically sports, to have people to say, you can do everything you can to win in the game of football. But at the end of the day, if it doesn't occur to anybody in the room that, hey, we should win this, if there's nobody with the intent on winning, you can be the best, you can be the best pedigree, best prepared team in the game on any given day. But if it hasn't occurred to anyone to, say, if we've got the ball at the end of the game, we have to step up and do this, there's no reason to not think we can do this. If you have to make a stop at the end of the game and there's no confidence in your defense saying, why not us? Why can't we go out here and execute the way we've been prepared and win this game? If there isn't that winning attitude to put people over the line, that's the reason that those Duke teams under Coach Cut, before they finally got over the hump in 2012, how many years did they lose to Carolina by a possession or less? You're right there, but you have to have, guys in the room that can say, damn it, let's get it done. Let's take that last step. And I think that's the supreme importance of having these few guys left that have been there, do have rings to show for the work they put in. And I think that, at the end of the day, while the change in the program was painful, I think that in the long run, it'll be beneficial for the program that the languishing wasn't allowed to go as far as it potentially could have, because you still have those guys in the room that are putting pads on that have done it before. They may not have been the guys, but they were on teams that won. They saw what it required, and they can then turn around and say, this is what we have to look forward to if we put the necessary work in.
I think for a team to win, there's a couple of things that have to occur. One, the players have to believe in themselves individually and their own ability. Two, the players have to believe in one another. And then the players have to believe in the staff and buy into the offensive, defensive, and kicking team schemes. But also, in addition to those things, what the team will need is depth. And I think that from talking to the folks that I've talked to who are on the team now, and for those of you who are on the team and listen to this podcast, I know some of you do. Thank you. All of you should, but that's an aside. They all seem to have bought in to those three things, right? They all seem to have certainly bought into Coach Elko. He's selling the program well. I mean, he's followed my account right away on Twitter, obviously a very intelligent move. And he's also been on the Section 17 podcast, which I think was a great move on his part. Everybody seems to have bought into the staff, but my concern is the depth issue going into this season, and that could be a problem. And I'm just curious what your thoughts are on those kind of four things that I laid out that a team needs to win, and particularly applying it to this Duke team.
I think you're absolutely right. I think at the end of the day, with a coaching change comes a lot of inevitable departures, and there's just not a lot you can do in college football or college sports this day and age to mitigate that. But you have to, you have to work with what you got. And part of implementing a new system is knowing what is too much, like knowing the workload on guys who the backups behind them might not be as deep. So you need them to go a little bit longer. Knowing the mental strain on guys learning new schemes, trying to absorb a new playbook on offense, learning, really when you're getting new leadership, it's learning how to, on a human level, connect with your position coach. And so, when you have depth issues, it's really incumbent upon the staff to, meet the players where they are. I think you'll see a little bit guys like Jalen Stinson, guys that had to play early. I think Graham Barton's another example. When Jack went down a couple of years ago now, and he was sort of forced in before I think the plan was for him to be, he's going to be an anchor of the offensive line this year. And we'll see a little bit of the benefit of that. But I do think, especially on the defensive side, the cupboard was essentially bare once you get past the anchors on the defensive line, Shaka Hayward. The defensive backfield is going to be a crapshoot. And I think in terms of depth, that's where you're going to see the biggest problem, because whereas there might be a healthy number of bodies, there's not a lot of playing experience back there. So I think it's especially incumbent on the coaching staff to know, when you're relying on fewer guys, when you're relying on a core that's on the whole a little bit less experienced, you have to know what buttons to push, which levers to pull, how to get the most out of the group that you have. And I think it'll be an interesting combination of situations where I think depth will help us and experience will help us. You look at the running back room with Jordan Waters, Jalen Coleman. Those are guys that have been grinding behind the scenes for years now. I think they will be, effective anchors. I think there's a couple guys in the offensive line that'll be, you're not going to have to worry about them in the scheme of things. I mean, I think we have the potential, if we can get the ball to them, to have one of the most gifted receiving cores in the ACC this year, with Eli Pankel, Jalen, it's going to be an interesting balance. And I think if played correctly, where our weaknesses can effectively cancel out, where our strengths can effectively cancel out our weaknesses, I think we could flirt with a bowl berth this year. And it's one of those things where there's a few games on the schedule that could go either way close enough that if the ball bounces the wrong way, I think we could be, 3-9. If the ball bounces the right way, I think we could be 6-6. But it's going to come down to circumstance to a certain degree. And it's also going to come down to how well the staff can use what they have, because frankly, like I said, the cupboard is just absolutely bare in a couple instances.
Well, I think one good way, if anybody on the staff is listening and they care about my opinion, which honestly, why would you? There's no reason to, but you can help your defense out by making the scheme a little bit simpler defensively, and then run the ball on offense, use a huddle, stop going tempo the entire time, and this is hearkening back to stuff that we saw towards the end of the Cutcliffe era. The defense was beat and they needed time, and there we are running a hurry up. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but I think a ground and pound attack on offense may really help out our defense.
And I think that's one really big upside of the center of power being on the defensive side of the ball and having a defensive minded head coach. I think one area that you've really seen the importance of blend in football sort of, dissipate has been how offenses and defenses effectively complement each other. And I think that's I really have always thought that was one reason that those years that Oregon was so good, and seemed like they were in the national championship every year, never could quite get over the hump. But one of the reasons that they never could, in my opinion, is they never could find the effective blend of defense and offense that complement each other. I think you're absolutely right. In recent years, I think we have been defensive reliant, but I think we have lacked the capacity on offense to help the defense in whatever way possible. And that wasn't always the case. My freshman year, we had no business being in the game with Lamar Jackson, but we nearly beat Louisville in Louisville because we were so effective at using the offense to give the defense the best situations they could possibly be put in. And I think that's one area that I would be I think Kevin Johns is going to have a fairly high powered offense. You don't come from, the history that he has. You think Memphis, you think offense. You don't come from the background he comes from without, there being a lot of, run and gun and high score and high yardage production. But I don't see a defensive head coach allowing that to get to the point where it would jeopardize the blend necessary to have an effective performance on the field from the defensive standpoint.
Go back and look at the Pinstripe Bowl game, and you can see just how capable and effective of an offense Coach Johns could put together and how it can keep a team in a game till they miss a field goal. And Coach Sims, they missed a field goal. I don't want to hear it.
They missed a field goal. They missed it. It wasn't even close. It wasn't as if it went directly over the line. I mean, you look up, it's demonstrably out. And I don't fault Indiana because, they ain't got a lot to fall back on in terms of football success, but.
Snap, bringing the heat. All right. Well, let's talk a little bit about what we want to see from the team this season. And here's what I'd like to see. And again, guys, I know I've been a little bit of a cold water guy, lower the expectations guy. And that's not, I'm speaking to the players, that's not because I have any, I believe in you guys. I know you guys are going to work hard. I know you're going to put in the time, and I know you're going to put in the effort. So I'm not being critical of you guys or the staff when I say this, but to build on a point Lee had made earlier and what we've talked about is it has been a brutal 2.5 years for this football program. 2020, 2021, about half of 2019 were brutal. And we've gotten away from an ability to compete on a weekly basis since 2018. I want to see the team get back to that. The wins and losses are not as important to me. Obviously, we all want them to win, but I want to see this team competitive again. And if we do that, I think that that's a successful season, regardless of the wins and losses, because it's going to take time to build this culture back and get it back to where we're going to bowl games again. That would be a successful season for me. But what would a successful season for you be? And kind of what do you expect from the team this season?
I have, there's the coach speak answer, and then there's the human answer. A successful season will be compete for an ACC championship and a chance to make the college football playoff. In terms of the growth that the program as a whole and the players as individuals go through, I want to see a season that's full of games where nobody wearing Duke blue has any regrets of the performance that they left on the field. And, I don't, from a football standpoint, I think that if that is achieved, I think that could look like a bowl berth. But I don't think it has to, because I think at the end of the day, the blood, sweat, tears, and toil that these guys have put in, what they deserve is to have a football season, and for these seniors to have a conclusion of their football careers that they have absolutely no regrets to speak of. And I think that is within their grasp. I think they have the apparatus around them. I think they have a collective relationship with their coaching staff that lends itself to the belief that the coaches have their best interest at heart, and the coaches recognize their effort and are going to reward them when they meet the standard that the coaches set. And I think this goes back to the hurdles that this program has to overcome in this year are not the same ones that the previous staff had to overcome. And I don't say that to say that a change didn't need to be made. I'm realistic enough of a person to say that we needed to do something different because what we were doing wasn't working. But when you look at this schedule, there are games where you can say that's a guaranteed win. That's a luxury that Duke football has not always enjoyed. I don't say guaranteed win in the sense of you don't have to go out and compete. I'm saying we can look at our non-conference schedule and say we could realistically go 4-0 in non-conference. And I think that outlook coming off of a coaching change and thinking about the continuity of the program, that's a luxury that we have not always enjoyed, and that's a luxury that we shouldn't underappreciate. And so we're going to have a lot of competitive games this year, in my opinion, in conference and out of conference. I think we're going to have realistically a handful of wins. And I think if you look at a few games in conference that are with programs that are also going through coaching changes, I think if the ball bounces a certain way, I think we could very well walk out with a victory. And a lot of people are overlooking it this year, but the UNC football team is a paper tiger. They have relied so heavily on Sam Howell, who I will say, he's a phenomenal football player. He's nauseatingly fun to watch. He's creative. He's a good athlete, and I think he represented his school well. But he has been holding together an apparatus that, you can't have that many 5-star recruits and not be competing for the ACC championship. And that's just simply not what they have been. That's not the standard that they have risen to. And so without Sam Howell, I think, especially with the juice that this staff has brought to Duke, I think this is a prime year to pick off Carolina. And make up for the fact that we haven't even been competitive with them in the past 2 years. I genuinely believe, I can't tell you what the outcome will be. I can't tell you what the score will be, but I genuinely believe we could go 4-0 in non-conference. I think we'll beat Georgia Tech. And I think Virginia Tech, Virginia, and Carolina are 6-5 and pick them.
All right. Two things from that. One, you mentioned Sam Howell, and you were kind enough to take some time to talk to a coworker of mine who's on the staff about going to law school because she's considering applying to the school that you're at, which will remain nameless. You sent a text that said that I was the kind of guy that would invite the least consequential player in the history of the ACC onto the podcast, to which I replied, I didn't invite Sam Howell on. Second, since and anybody playing on the Duke team, if this gets you hit during the Carolina game, I'm sorry. All right. I'm just going to apologize now. But you talked about schedule, so you can't back out of this now. We're going to do a win-loss projection. All right. I'm going to call out the games. You give me the hot. You're bringing fire today. So give me your takes on who's going to win. All right. Friday night, September 2, 7:30 p.m. Brooks Field at Wallace Wade. Temple visits. Who wins?
I think that's a really important game in terms of setting the tone, because Temple is not a pushover program. They've got a lot of good athletes. They've got a winning culture, and you can't overlook a school just because they're Group of Five, not Power Five. And I think we're getting them at the perfect time, because what more focused a time is there than the first game of a new administration? So I think it'll be a good game. I think it'll be a win. And I'm not just saying that because one of my best friends from high school played at Temple, and he and I have a running wager whenever Duke and Temple play.
All right. Now we're going to go to Northwestern at Evanston, Illinois, Ryan Field. Who you got?
I think we pull that out too. I think Northwestern has had a good stretch, but I think that they're getting to the point where the carrot is going to turn it back into a pumpkin. I think that's a win.
North Carolina A&T.
I don't think it is a drastic thing to say that I think that'll be a win too. Although I have all the respect in the world for the Aggies. Not supposed to say that as a Durham native because, Eagle pride, and that hasn't changed. But, it's hard to envision, a culture and a program in terms of everything working together, alumni, fan support, history, tradition, expectation than the North Carolina A&T football program. And it's such a pleasure to encounter any aspect of their program, whether or not it's how they play, whether or not it's how they, present themselves, whether or not it's the pride with which they represent HBCU football. I mean, just what a phenomenal winning and, what a phenomenal culture of excellence they've cultivated. And it's so much fun to watch them play.
And keep in mind, they really stuck it to the Blue Devils for about 30 minutes last season. And thank God for halftime, because that was a frustratingly odd start to that game. All right. Kansas, game 4.
Yes, I think that will be a win, but I don't think it'll be a foregone conclusion. I think Kansas, this is, I think, the second year under a new coach. Their coach has Lance Leopold. He came up in that Wisconsin Whitewater pipeline. Those years they had those great battles with Mount Union at the Division III level. I think he came from Buffalo, and I might have that off, but he's a winner. And I think you can't have the resources that Kansas has as a major state school, and as with the success they have in basketball. The Kansas brand is a winning brand, just like how David Cutcliffe co-opted the Duke basketball brand to revamp how the world saw Duke football. You can't exist like that without a certain amount of success. It's inevitable. So I think we'll win. I don't think it'll be a foregone conclusion because I think Kansas, there's nowhere to go but up. But, the second year of these new administrations is especially dangerous. I mean, look at what Matt Rule did in his second year at Baylor.
Well, for the Carolina Panther fans out there, we're not going to mention Matt Rule too much.
I'm a Steelers fan, so I have a certain level of immunity there.
All right, we'll scratch that one. That Kansas game really worries me. That one scares me because it seemed like they started really buying into their coach about middle part of last season, and really started to get to a point where they were playing a lot better. So that game really worries me. Now, let's go into conference play with the University of Virginia on October 1st.
So this one's tricky because I think, there's with the change there, I think there's the inevitable growing pains of a new head coach. But say what you will about Bronco Mendenhall, he left a lot of toys in the toy chest at Virginia. They are not hurting for athleticism. I think their quarterback's back, is he not?
Yes.
I think it has the potential to be competitive, but unfortunately, I don't think that we pull that one out. Also, because that's another one. It's been a long time since the boys in Duke blue have beat the boys in blue and orange. And getting over that proverbial hump, that that's a real thing. It seemed the mental aspect of it seems superficial from an outside perspective, but it's been a long, long time. And I think unfortunately we will not come away with that one.
All right. And I skipped one, so I got to fix my sheet here. But Georgia Tech.
I think you got it right. I think isn't it Virginia then Georgia Tech?
Correct. Yeah. I wrote down when I was saying I skipped one, I had skipped the Georgia Tech game and went straight to the Carolina game. We're not overlooking the Yellow Jackets. That was just me trying to scroll and write at the same time. So give us your thoughts on Georgia Tech.
I think that'll be a win. I think, again, Georgia Tech, one thing that Coach Collins has done is get as, especially in the aftermath of a system as unique as what Paul Johnson ran, it takes a long, long time to, restock the cupboard with athletes that can compete at the Division I level, not in a double wing flex bone, I think is what Johnson called it, offense. He's recruited well, but at the end of the day, I think there's been too much turnover in that program to have any kind of sustained success. And I think we come away with that one, even with it being in Georgia Tech. That's, not the most notorious home field advantage in the world.
All right. So through 6 games, you have the Blue Devils at 5-1. All right. Now we come home on October 15 for North Carolina.
I stand by what I said earlier. I have not had much faith in North Carolina since Mac Brown has returned. They've got more 5 stars than the night sky. They've got the brand, they've got the, flashy Argyle, they've got the basketball player in their football uniforms, everything you can want to be a successful program on TikTok. But, at the end of the day, they have been buoyed by overachievers at certain key positions. And I don't see them having it this year. I've never seen a team with a physically more imposing offensive line than they did last year, and a more ineffectual offensive line in terms of executing on the field. Sam Howell's a good player, but he couldn't throw off his back. That's why they struggled. And they do have if I'm not mistaken, they do have a new defensive coordinator. But I think it's I don't think it's going to be enough. I predict the Blue Devils pull that one out, especially because it's at home, and especially because, Wallace Wade is not the most juice-infused stadium in the Power Five, but when the boys in baby blue come to town, we know how to put on a pretty good show. So I think the Blue Devils pull that one out and reach bowl eligibility.
A lot of fire there, and if you're keeping track, Lee has us at a bowl game, bowl eligible through 7 at 6-1. And North Carolina does have a new defensive coordinator. It's the new old defensive coordinator, Gene Chizik. So let's turn to the remaining 5 games. Miami, Boston College, Virginia Tech, Pitt, and Wake.
So, not to be a bad alumni, but in terms of being a realistic football analyst, I don't see a large upside against Miami. I think for the first time in a while, they have really, I think they're going to have all the pieces clicking at the right time. Again, new coach, but I think there's a situation where they've got enough experience, enough athletes that, the negative side effects of that will be pretty effectively mitigated. I think we lose to Miami.
All right, Boston College.
Again, this is one where I think our depth is really going to come into play and is going to be a really big hamstring because, at the end of the day, the few certainties in life include death, taxes, and the fact that Boston College is going to play smash mouth football. They're not flashy. They're not going to throw the ball around. They're going to put it on the ground and run at you against behind a pretty, healthy offensive line. And I think this is one of the areas that the struggles of our program and the respective schematic focuses of our program have left us sort of wanting. I think it's a big reason that we struggle so much against Pitt, because we get out physically, physicality wise, we get out competed, not for any lack of want to, but if you're a 270-pound defensive lineman, there's only so many times the 330-pound offensive lineman can hit you before it starts to wear on you. So I do not think that the Blue Devils will pull it out against Boston College.
Virginia Tech.
This is interesting because I think this is another program that is going through a transition sort of akin to what Duke is going through. I think athletically, they probably started from a better point, because compared to Duke, everyone starts from a better point. But I think it's going to be really key on how their new staff can implement what it is that they want their program to look like. I think there's a lot of similarities there in that, especially, our new coach is a defensive minded guy. Their new coach is a defensive minded guy, both who've had a lot of success at high levels. I think the fact that we're not in Lane Stadium will work in our favor. And, I think that Virginia Tech has a lot to figure out on both sides of the ball. I think my Homer alumni, my guys or nothing pick will be, I can see Duke beating Virginia Tech in Wallace Wade in November football. I can see us competing at that, assuming we're healthy.
All right, Pitt.
Again, talk about a program that can just has it rolling. They can reload. They have a system. No matter how individualistic you are as a player, you're going to be inserted in their system, and more often than not, they're good enough at finding ways to make you successful. So, in spite of losing whatever the guy's name was to USC, which, at the end of the day, I think the punditry made more about that than the actual consequences will present themselves on the field. But I don't see us beating Pitt this year.
All right, and closing out against Wake, what do you got?
As much as it pains my Duke grad Methodist heart to say, I just don't think we have the horses to beat the Baptist boys from Winston-Salem this year. So as much as I would like to get them back, and another one of my real dear friends from high school, we all played in the same offensive line. One went to Temple, one went to Wake Forest to play, and I ended up at Duke. So that ties back into the Northern High School offensive line college competition, but I don't think we pull out against Wake Forest this year.
All right, so we get a bowl game. For those of you who are keeping track at home, Lee has us at 7-5. We win the first 4, then lose to UVA, then beat Georgia Tech, North Carolina, losses to Miami and Boston College, followed by a win against Virginia Tech, and then 2 losses to close out the season, Pitt and Wake. That is one heck of a start to the Elko era, man.
Now, I think I will hedge my bets by saying I think there is a range. I think I can see us going anywhere from 7-5 to 5-7. I don't think we will go winless in the conference. I think the physical transformation that Coach Feely is affecting in the program in the weight room will pay off, and I think the issues of physicality will dissipate in coming years, and I think that will manifest itself in an end to our conference woes that we've been experiencing. Even when we were winning bowl games, we still weren't doing a phenomenal job in conference. And I think that's something that's going to start to change.
Well, I think that for Duke to have any chance this season, they're going to have to go at least 3-1 non-conference, but 4-0 would make it a lot easier. And then you just got to win 2 conference games at that point, somewhere between 2 and 3. And you're looking at Georgia Tech, maybe Virginia Tech isn't quite settled in yet, although I like what those guys are doing. And, Pitt's had a lot of turnover. I mean, they've got a lot of talent. They've got a lot of ability, but they lost a very good quarterback. They lost a very talented wide receiver. They've got a new offensive play caller. There's a lot there that if, to your point, the conditioning is good enough and the balance between offense and defense is there, maybe Duke can steal one late. But a lot of things have to come together to make that work and for Duke to have a good season, because the range could be anywhere between 4 wins and 7 wins. None of those are outside the realm of possibility. It's all going to depend on a whole lot of things that we're just going to have to watch. One of the most important ones is, of course, going to be health, which we hope the Blue Devils have a healthy and successful season. But why don't we get into your final thoughts? Anything else you want to say? You've been on here before. You get an open mic.
Absolutely. I think the important thing is for Duke fans to remember that no matter what happens, these guys are not only human, a lot of them are very young humans. And when you offer commentary and when you cheer on your team and when I'm not someone who's so idealistic to say that you shouldn't, express frustration, but remember, whether or not it's online, whether or not it's in person, you're surrounded by people who may or may not be related to the player that just messed up on the field. You're yelling at a 19, 20-year-old kid. You might be sitting next to his mom. When you're online, everyone likes to say, I block out all the noise, all this kind of stuff, but I still have screenshots of stuff I remember seeing said about my teammates when I was in school that I just couldn't conceive of either saying out loud or typing out and putting it where other human beings could see it. These are real people. These, especially with NIL. I think that's a good way to end it. I've seen a lot of frustration with the culture that NIL has given rise to in terms of self-promotion, in terms of players for the first time acting in their own best interest or really being allowed to act in their own best interest. And I think people really need to remember, how many years have these players been at the mercy of their programs, their coaches, whether or not their coach happened to like them, whether or not, they managed to stay within the very thin, unrealistic parameters of discipline that the NCAA sets out for its players that has nothing to do with the well-being of the players and everything to do with the NCAA's bottom line. Maurice Claret, Reggie Bush, there's so many stories of players that in the grand scheme of things didn't do anything wrong from an objective standpoint, but have fallen prey to unrealistic expectations of anybody, let alone college athletes with the unique pressures they have to face. Is NIL perfect? Absolutely not. Is it too akin to the Wild West? It absolutely is. But part of the problem is the NCAA wouldn't loosen up on the reins. If the NCAA had done anything towards, recognizing the work that these athletes at any level put in and across any sport, then I have to imagine that the court system would have been more lenient in how they interpreted the uncompensated labor aspects of the jurisprudence that led to the situation that we're in. But the NCAA and the powers that be would not let up, in the well-being of the athletes. And I'm sorry, there is no athlete on any athletic team, Division I or otherwise, that should be struggling to make ends meet when the training table isn't open. And that's the reality that we were living in. There should be absolutely no athlete who is devoting 30 plus hours a week of their lives to their sports that should go hungry, that should have a hard time purchasing, personal hygiene products, that should have a hard time doing anything or should have a hard time dealing with things that could potentially take away from their studies or their competition on the field. But that's what you were seeing because the NCAA was so intransigent in taking care of athletes and making sure they had, their rights were protected, their well-being after school was protected, especially if someone was injured. And I think at the end of the day, where I fall on this is, the athletes have benefited. And I'm going to be in favor of anything that benefits the athletes. And I think just like prohibition, something that was instituted with for all the right reasons, you ban something, but all that does is force it underground. It doesn't stop it. So you ban benefits to athletes, you ban athletes being able to be compensated based off their name, image, and likeness. All that does is empower runners, it empowers agents, it empowers nefarious actors who then prey on at-risk, upcoming high school athletes and exploit them for their labor. And then it might not even pay off in the long run because there's no guarantee that these athletes could turn pro and make a profit off of the labor they put in. So what this does is it brings out into the light, it makes things, it makes the playing field a little bit more level between the traditional power brokers, school administration, NCAA administration, the marketing companies, the shoe companies. It gives the athletes a seat at the table. And at the end of the day, that's a net positive, in my opinion. So I think in addition to, remembering there needs to be a certain decorum in how fans interact with athletes at any level, at any school. Remember, when you think about, how things have affected the game, I see a lot of people saying, well, there's no loyalty to the school anymore. And the thing that I ask those people is, were you demanding loyalty from the school to the player before that? And I think when we remember at the core of all this, that these athletes are young people who are going through a very stressful transitional time in their lives, I think all this comes back into perspective a lot more fairly. So that's what I feel like a broken record, because I feel like I touch on that at least a little bit every time I'm on here. But I don't think it can be said enough. Remember, at the end of the day, these are real people, and all of our lives will be a lot better if we focus on the positives and not the negatives, putting people down, all that kind of stuff. And what better place to do that than a school like Duke, where you can know a devoted fan can form relationships with athletes. If you come to enough stuff, you'll inevitably start to know people in the program. You can form relationships with coaches, staffers, and it can really mean something because they're not anonymous faces running around the field. They're actually people who you've been able to watch and meet and cheer on and encourage. We've got something really good going at Duke, and I'm so excited for what the future holds. And I'm so thankful that we have someone like Nina to direct us in the future.
And two quick thoughts on the points that you made on loyalty. Remember, the institution will never love you back. And in regard to players having the ability to do what is being done through the NIL, the way that I think about it is the players now get to do what the coaches have always been able to do.
Amen.
And I don't think that there's anything wrong with leveling the playing field.
Yep.
But Lee, thank you for coming on this evening. And for the listeners out there, we are headed into the football season, which means the podcast is going to go dormant for a bit as I head back over to bullcitycoordinators.com to do game previews and game recaps and probably some quarter season or mid-season reports. We'll see what happens. I just want to say to everybody who listens and everybody who goes to the site, thank you. It means a lot. And I also want to thank everybody who has come on for season 2. Randy Cuthbert, Joey Finnison, Gunnar Holmberg, Jake Bobo, Anthony Nash, Dave Brown, Clarkston Hines, Perry Simmons, Trey Hornbuckle, George Perks, Eli Pankel, Carlos Ray, Porter Wilson, Dan Siegel, Matt Sims, my guy Jeff, and of course, Lee Rodio. Thank you all for coming on. And thanks again to everybody who listens. We'll be back for season 3, which will hopefully start after Duke wins a bowl game this season. But until then, check us out at bullcitycoordinators.com. Go Duke.
Go Duke.